The great chamber of the Galactic Council stretched so wide that Jake Mitchell could barely see the far walls through the shimmer of energy fields and the bodies of 1,000 alien species. He stood at the center of a circular platform that floated 3 meters above the main floor, and every eye, sensor, and detection organ in the room was pointed. Directly at him and his companion, Dr. Lisa Warren stood beside him with her datapad clutched tight in both hands, and Jake could see her knuckles had gone white from the pressure. They had traveled for 6 months to reach this place, and now that they were finally here, the reception was not what either of them had hoped for. The laughter started small at first, just a few chirps and clicks from the delegates nearest to the platform. But it spread like wildfire through the assembled crowd until the entire chamber echoed with the sounds of alien amusement. Jake kept his face carefully neutral, even though every instinct told him to defend himself and his species from this mockery. He had been a military commander for 15 years, and he knew how to keep his composure under pressure. But this was different from any combat situation he had ever faced. This was worse somehow because there was no enemy to fight. Just the casual dismissal of beings who thought they knew everything about humanity without ever setting foot on Earth. Ambassador. Dexner rose from his seat in the upper galleries, and his crystalline body caught the light from a dozen different sources as he moved. When he spoke, his voice was translated into English by the small device attached to Jake's collar, and the tone was unmistakably condescending. The ambassador gestured toward the 2 humans with one of his many faceted limbs and addressed the council as if Jake and Lisa were not even present. He told the assembled delegates that humanity claimed to come from a death world, but that the preliminary scans showed nothing more than a pleasant garden planet with mild temperatures and abundant resources. The laughter grew louder. A delegate from the Vrin Collective joined in, and her voice carried a sharp edge that the translator rendered as barely concealed contempt. She pulled up a holographic display that showed Earth rotating slowly in the center of the chamber, and pointed out the blue oceans and green continents and white clouds that drifted across the surface. According to her analysis, Earth registered as a category 3 world on the galactic hazard scale, which meant it was barely more dangerous than the most peaceful paradise planets in known space. She went on to explain that true Death Worlders came from places with crushing gravity, or toxic atmospheres, or extreme temperature variations, and that humanity's planet had none of these things. More laughter followed, and Jake felt his jaw tighten. Lisa finally found her voice and spoke up despite the noise. She told the council that they should examine the application more carefully because the preliminary classification was incomplete and based only on atmospheric readings taken from orbit. Several delegates turned to look at her with what might have been curiosity, or might have been continued amusement, and Jake could not tell which. The translator struggled with some of the alien expressions, but the general mood was clear enough. Nobody in this chamber took humanity seriously. Dexner's crystalline form seemed to shimmer with delight as he responded. He called Lisa child in a tone that made it clear he considered all humans to be little more than youngsters playing at galactic politics. He reminded her that the Council had been cataloging worlds for thousands of years and had detailed records of over 93,000 planets in their database. When you had seen as many worlds as they had, he said, you learned to recognize a garden planet at first glance. Earth was comfortable and safe, and had probably never challenged its inhabitants in any meaningful way. The humans had grown soft in their paradise, and now they wanted to claim the honor of being Deathworlders without having earned it. Jake stepped forward, and the platform sensors adjusted to his movement with a barely perceptible hum. He looked up at Dexner and at the hundreds of other delegates who watched with varying degrees of interest and skepticism. He spoke slowly and clearly, and made sure his words were loud enough for the translator to pick up every syllable. He told the Council to send an expedition to Earth and see for themselves what the planet was really like. He said that humanity would welcome their survey team and provide full cooperation for any tests or observations they wanted to conduct. The only thing he asked was that they actually look at the evidence before making their final judgment. The chamber fell silent, and Jake could feel the weight of 1,000 alien gazes pressing down on him. It was a bold challenge, and everyone in the room knew it. In galactic politics, you did not make such offers lightly. Because if you were proven wrong, the shame would follow your species for generations. But if you were proven right, then those who had doubted, you would have to acknowledge their error in front of the entire council. It was a gamble that could either establish humanity's credibility or destroy it completely. The head counselor was a being of pure energy contained within a magnetic field that glowed with soft blue light. When it spoke, the entire chamber seemed to vibrate with the force of its words. The counselor said that the challenge was accepted and that a survey team would be dispatched to Earth within the standard time frame. The team would conduct a thorough analysis of the planet's environment, fauna, geological activity, and atmospheric conditions. When they returned with their findings, the council would reconvene to hear their report and make a final decision on humanity's application for membership. Until then, the humans were dismissed. Jake and Lisa left the platform and made their way through the crowd of delegates toward the exit. Some of the aliens moved aside to let them pass, while others seemed to deliberately block their path as if to emphasize humanity's low status. Nobody spoke to them directly, and the few conversations Jake overheard through his translator were all variations on the same theme. The humans were delusional or desperate for attention, or simply ignorant of how the galaxy really worked. Earth was clearly a paradise world, and its inhabitants were soft creatures who had never faced real hardship. The survey team would return in 3 months with proof of this, and then humanity would slink away in embarrassment as they reached the corridor. Outside the main chamber, Lisa finally let out the breath she had been holding. She looked at Jake with worried eyes and asked if he thought they had made the right choice. Jake considered the question carefully before answering. He told her that there was no other choice to make, because the council would never have taken them seriously without proof. The survey team would go to Earth, and they would see the truth. They would see the storms and the earthquakes and the predators and the diseases. They would see how humans lived every single day with dangers that would terrify most galactic species. And when they came back and reported what they found, everything would change. The mockery would end, and the real conversation would begin. Lisa nodded slowly, and Jake could see her squaring her shoulders as she prepared for what came next. They had 3 months before the survey team arrived on Earth, and 3 months before the galaxy learned what humanity really was. Captain Zormak had seen more worlds than most beings would visit in 10 lifetimes, and he prided himself on his ability to assess a planet's danger level within minutes of entering orbit. He had walked on frozen methane seas and volcanic hellscapes where the ground itself tried to kill you with every step. He had survived encounters with predators that could tear through military-grade armor and weather systems that could strip flesh from bone in seconds. So when his ship dropped out of faster-than-light travel on Earth, appeared on his view screen as a peaceful blue and green sphere, he felt nothing but vindication. The humans had lied, or at least dramatically exaggerated, and now he would return to the council with proof of their deception. His science officer, Plex, ran the standard scans from orbit and confirmed what Zormak already knew in his hearts. The planet registered as Category 3 on every metric they used. The gravity was actually slightly lower than galactic standard, which meant it would be easier to move around, not harder. The atmosphere was thick with oxygen and nitrogen in ratios that suggested abundant plant life and stable ecosystems. The temperature range across most of the inhabited zones fell within comfortable parameters that required no special equipment. There were no radiation belts strong enough to threaten surface life, and no obvious signs of extreme geological instability. It was exactly the kind of world that wealthy families paid fortunes to retire on, Zormak ordered his pilot to take them down to the surface and selected a landing site near one of the larger human population centers in a region marked as Australia on their maps. The humans had provided full cooperation as promised, and had even sent suggested coordinates for the survey team to investigate. Zormak chose to ignore those suggestions because he suspected they would lead to carefully prepared sites that showed Earth in the worst possible light. Instead, he picked a random spot in what appeared to be lightly populated wilderness. If this was truly a death world, then danger would be everywhere, not just in selected locations. The shuttle touched down in a clearing surrounded by dense vegetation, and Zormak gave the order to open the main hatch. The moment the seal broke and outside air rushed into the cabin, Plex collapsed onto the deck with a strangled gasp. Zormak moved quickly to his science officer's side and checked his vital signs while the two security personnel activated their emergency protocols. Plex was breathing, but barely, and his respiratory system seemed to be struggling with every intake of air. Zormak quickly sealed his own helmet and adjusted the internal atmosphere before helping Plex do the same. When Plex could finally speak again, his voice was shaky with shock. He explained that the oxygen concentration was actually poisonous at sustained exposure for most species in the galaxy. At 21%, the reactive properties of oxygen would slowly damage cellular structures and require constant biological repair. Most spacefaring races had evolved on worlds. It was 12 to 15% oxygen, and anything above 18 was considered dangerously high. The humans breathed this toxic mixture every moment of every day, and their entire biology was built around harnessing its destructive power for energy production. They literally burned their food inside their bodies at the cellular level. Zormak stood at the edge of the shuttle ramp and looked out at the landscape with new eyes. The thick vegetation that covered everything suddenly seemed less like abundant life and more like the aggressive growth of organisms, adapted to hyperoxic conditions. The bright blue sky that had looked so inviting from orbit now seemed ominous. He activated his scanner and began recording data for the official report while trying to ignore the growing unease in his stomach. Something moved in the bushes to their left, and the entire survey team froze. The creature that emerged was massive. Easily 3 meters tall, with powerful legs and a thick tail that looked like it could break bones with a casual swing. It was covered in reddish-brown fur and had dark eyes that fixed on the aliens with clear intelligence. Zormak raised his scanner with hands that trembled slightly and waited for the analysis. When the results appeared on his display, he had to read them twice to believe what he was seeing. Plex confirmed the readings from his own equipment. The creature was called a red kangaroo, and according to the biological database, it was an herbivore, which meant it only ate plants. Zormak stared at the massive animal and tried to process this information. A plant eater on his homeworld would be small and quick and built for hiding from predators. This thing looked like it could fight off an attack vehicle. The kangaroo regarded them for a few more seconds, then suddenly launched itself forward in a bound that covered at least 7 meters. It continued hopping away through the bush with explosive bursts of speed that would have outpaced their shuttle at ground level. The security team leader asked the obvious question. If that was what plant eaters looked like on this world, then what did the predators look like? Nobody wanted to answer. Zormak forced himself to continue the survey and led his team toward the coast, where his orbital scans had detected interesting thermal signatures. The walk took 20 minutes, and with each step he noticed new details that made him more uncomfortable. The plants had thorns and toxic leaves. The insects were large enough to see from meters away. The bird calls that echoed through the forest had an aggressive quality that suggested territorial behavior. When they reached the water, Zormak stopped at the edge and activated his scanner to analyze what he was seeing below the surface. The ocean was clear and beautiful and absolutely filled with movement. Sleek shapes glided through the water with the kind of efficiency that came from millions of years of evolutionary refinement. Plex identified them as sharks and pulled up the relevant data from Earth's biological records. Some species grew to 6 meters in length. Their bodies were perfect hunting machines that had remained virtually unchanged for 400 million years, because natural selection had already found the optimal design for killing. Zormak watched the sharks patrol the shallows and felt his worldview shifting. He asked Plex to confirm something he had read in the preliminary cultural files. Plex nodded and explained that humans regularly swam in these waters for recreation. They knew the sharks were there, and they entered the water anyway. Some humans even sought out sharks deliberately to observe them or photograph them. Children played in the surf while apex predators circled just beyond the break line. A shadow passed overhead, and Zormak looked up to see a bird that was far too large for its wingspan. The scanner identified it as a wedge-tailed eagle with a hunting range that included prey up to the size of young kangaroos. The bird circled lazily on thermal currents and watched the aliens below with the patience of something that knew how to wait for the right Moment to strike. Zormak made his decision without consulting the others. He ordered an immediate return to the shuttle, and when Plex started to protest, he cut him off with a gesture. They had seen enough. More than enough. Every single assumption they had made about Earth was wrong, and continuing the ground survey would only put his team at greater risk. They needed to get back to orbit and conduct a full analysis of every database the humans had provided. They needed to understand what they were really dealing with before anyone else set foot on this planet. Back aboard the ship, Zormak sealed himself in his quarters and began reviewing data. What emerged over the following hours was a picture of a world that defied everything the Galactic Council knew about habitable planets. Earth was home to millions of species that competed constantly for survival. The humans shared their world with creatures that could kill them in countless ways, from the microscopic bacteria that waged invisible war inside their bodies to the massive predators that had once hunted their ancestors across open grasslands. The planet itself was just as hostile as its inhabitants. Plex sent him reports on seismic activity that showed Earth's crust was broken into massive plates that ground against each other constantly. The humans had marked every major fault line and volcanic zone on their maps and then built cities right on top of them. They had detailed records of earthquakes and eruptions and tsunamis that had killed thousands of people at a time. And after each disaster, they simply rebuilt and continued living in the same dangerous locations. The weather data was equally disturbing. Earth's atmosphere generated storms of incredible violence driven by temperature differences and planetary rotation. Hurricanes with wind speeds exceeding 300 kilometers per hour. Tornadoes that could level entire settlements in minutes. Lightning that struck the surface 8 million times per day. Blizzards that could freeze exposed flesh in seconds. Floods that could wash away homes and people and vehicles. The humans tracked all of these threats with sophisticated monitoring systems and then went about their daily lives as if such dangers were perfectly normal. Zormak called Plex to his quarters and told him to reclassify Earth immediately. When Plex asked what category to use, Zormak realized he did not have a good answer. Category 7 seemed too low given what they had discovered, but Category 8 was reserved for worlds that were barely survivable, even with advanced technology. The humans lived on Earth without any special protection beyond simple clothing and shelter. They thrived there. They had built a global civilization there. He told Plex to recommend Category 8 and include a note that the classification might need to be revised upward if further investigation revealed additional hazards. The emergency session of the Galactic Council assembled faster than anyone could remember in recent history, and the chamber that had been filled with mocking laughter just 3 months earlier now buzzed with nervous energy and fearful speculation. Jake Mitchell and Lisa Warren stood once again at the center of the floating platform, but this time the mood was completely different. The delegates who had dismissed humanity so casually were now leaning forward in their seats with expressions that ranged from concern to outright alarm. Jake kept his face neutral, but inside he felt a grim satisfaction that the truth was finally coming out. The head counselor called the session to order with a pulse of energy that silenced the chamber instantly. Captain Zormak was summoned to present his findings, and the Vrin officer stepped onto a secondary platform that rose beside the humans. Jake noticed that Zormak would not meet his eyes, and the captain's usual confident bearing had been replaced with something that looked almost like shame. The head counselor directed Zormak to share his report with the full assembly and warned that the findings had significant implications for the entire galactic community. Zormak began by admitting that his initial assessment of Earth had been catastrophically wrong. He stated clearly that the planet should be immediately reclassified as a minimum Category 7 death world, with strong evidence supporting Category 8 status. The gasps and alarmed sounds that filled the chamber were exactly what Jake had expected. Category 7 worlds were places that required specialized equipment and training just to survey. Category 8 worlds were so hostile that only 3 had ever been documented in all of galactic history, and none of them had ever been successfully colonized by any species. The captain activated a holographic display that filled the center of the chamber. With images from Earth, Jake watched the faces of the delegates as they saw sharks gliding through clear water and crocodiles basking on riverbanks and bears fishing for salmon, and snakes coiled in defensive positions. Zormak explained that these were just a tiny sample of the predators that shared Earth with humanity. The planet was home to an estimated 8.7 million species, and a significant percentage of them were capable of killing humans through venom or physical force or disease. The predators were efficient killing machines refined by hundreds of millions of years of evolution. Even the herbivores were dangerous with their massive size and defensive capabilities. A delegate from the Chlorosystem interrupted to point out that these were merely animals, and surely the humans could avoid them if they chose to do so. Zormak's response was delivered in a flat tone that made it clear how absurd he found the suggestion. He explained that humans did not avoid these creatures. They kept some of them as companions in their homes. They swam in waters that were known habitats for sharks and other predators. They hiked through forests where bears and large cats hunted. Some humans deliberately sought out dangerous animals for sport or photography or simple entertainment. Lisa spoke up too. Clarify that wildlife observation was considered a normal recreational activity on Earth. Families took vacations to see animals in their natural habitats. Children grew up learning to identify which creatures were dangerous and how to react if they encountered them. Swimming at beaches was one of the most popular leisure activities. Despite the presence of sharks and jellyfish and other hazards, the council chamber erupted in confused chatter as delegates tried to process this information. Zormak continued his presentation by explaining that the fauna was only one aspect of Earth's hostility. The planet itself was a violent and unstable environment that constantly threatened its inhabitants. He displayed images of volcanic eruptions and earthquakes and tsunamis and hurricanes. He showed footage of tornadoes tearing through human settlements and lightning storms that turned the sky into a battlefield. The weather systems on Earth were driven by extreme temperature differentials and rapid planetary rotation that created storms of devastating power. These were not rare events, but regular occurrences that humans had learned to predict and prepare for and survive. A senior delegate asked how humans could possibly have settlements across the entire planet if the environment was so hostile. Jake answered this time and explained that humans adapted and rebuilt and persevered. When a tornado destroyed a town, they constructed it again with stronger materials. When an earthquake leveled a city, they redesigned the buildings to withstand greater forces. When floods wiped out crops, they planted again in the next season. This was simply normal life on Earth. Humanity had never known anything different, and so they had developed cultures and technologies specifically designed to cope with constant environmental threats. Ambassador Dexner spoke for the first time since the session began, and his earlier mockery had been replaced by genuine confusion. He asked if there were any safe zones on Earth where human children could be raised without exposure to danger. Lisa shook her head and explained that every region of Earth had its own unique hazards. Children in Australia learned to check their shoes for venomous spiders before putting them on. Children in North America learned to identify poisonous snakes and what to do if they encountered a bear. Children in coastal areas learned to recognize the warning signs of tsunamis and hurricanes. Safety education began as soon as children could understand language because waiting too long could be fatal. Plex stepped forward to add a detail that he had discovered during his analysis of human biology. He explained that human bodies were specifically adapted to function in the high oxygen. It's an environment that would be toxic to most galactic species. Their cellular repair systems worked at remarkable speeds to counteract the oxidative damage. Their pain tolerance was extraordinary compared to other species. Their recreational activities included things that would be considered insane by any other civilization. Humans climbed vertical rock faces using only their hands and feet. They threw themselves from aircraft and relied on fabric parachutes to survive the fall. They slid down mountains on wooden planks at speeds that could cause fatal impacts. They did these things voluntarily for enjoyment, the head counselor asked Zormak to confirm his recommendation for Category 8 classification. The captain nodded and listed the criteria that Earth met or exceeded. Hostile megafauna that posed constant threat to inhabitants. Extreme weather systems capable of destroying settlements. Geological instability including active volcanic and seismic zones. Atmospheric composition hazardous to most known species. And one final factor that Zormak had saved for last. Earth had experienced 5 mass extinction events in its history. These were catastrophic occurrences that killed between 70 and 95% of all life on the planet each time they happened. Humanity was descended from the survivors of these apocalyptic disasters. The silence that fell over the chamber was absolute. Jake could hear his own heartbeat in the quiet. The head counselor pulsed slowly as it processed this information. 5 extinction events. 5 times when life on Earth had been nearly wiped out completely. And each time the survivors had adapted and evolved and eventually thrived again. The humans were the product of 4 billion years of continuous survival pressure on one of the most hostile, habitable planets in the known galaxy. Jake decided it was time to make his point clear. He told the council that humanity had tried to explain that Earth was a death world, but they had not been believed. The delegates had not taken humans seriously because they did not look like what everyone expected survivors to look like. Humans did not have natural armor or claws or venom or any of the obvious defensive features. What humans had was adaptability and endurance and a stubborn refusal to give up. They had learned to master a planet that tried to kill them constantly. They had developed intelligence and tool use and cooperation as survival strategies. And now they were here applying for council membership not in spite of their origins, but because of them. Lisa added that Earth had taught humanity lessons that could not be learned on safer worlds. They understood that challenges could be overcome with creativity and persistence. They knew that cooperation was more effective than competition for long-term survival. They had learned to value life because they fought for it every single day. These were not weaknesses, but strengths, and humanity was ready to bring those strengths to the galactic community. The head counselor announced that the council would adjourn to consider the new information and that a final vote on humanity's membership application would be held within one standard cycle. As the delegates filed out of the chamber, Jake could hear fragments of conversations in dozens of languages. Some were expressing concern about allowing Deathworlders into civilized space. Others were speculating about what humans might be capable of if they turned their survival skills toward military applications. A few voices suggested that humanity might be valuable allies precisely because of their unique abilities. Jake and Lisa left the platform and made their way through the crowd. This time the delegates moved aside quickly and gave them plenty of space. The casual dismissal had been replaced by wary respect. Nobody laughed. Nobody mocked. The humans from the Category 8 Deathworld walked through the council halls with their heads held high, and for the first time since arriving in galactic space, they felt like they were being seen for what they truly were. The news spread across the galaxy faster than any ship could travel, and within days, every spacefaring civilization knew that Earth had been reclassified as a Category 8 death world. The species that had been laughed at and dismissed was now the subject of fearful speculation and wild rumors that grew more dramatic with each retelling. Humanity went from being seen as soft garden worlders to something far more dangerous than nobody was quite sure how to process this dramatic reversal. The political and military implications rippled outward from the council chambers and touched every corner of galactic society. In the core systems of the Vryn hegemony, military analysts gathered in secure facilities to review every piece of available data about humanity. General Kickstart sat in a darkened briefing room and watched footage of human soldiers conducting training exercises. The humans ran for kilometers while carrying heavy equipment. They scaled walls and crossed obstacles and operated in environments that ranged from frozen wastelands to scorching deserts. The general stopped the footage and asked his intelligence officer if this was special forces training or some kind of elite program. The answer made his blood run cold. The intelligence officer explained that what they were watching was basic training that every human soldier underwent before being considered ready for military service. The physical conditioning lasted for months and involved running and climbing and carrying loads that would break most species. The humans did this voluntarily, and those who could not meet the standards were simply sent home. These were not elite warriors but average soldiers, and the training was designed to prepare them for combat in any environment. The officer pulled up additional files that showed human special forces, and their capabilities were even more. Extreme Kickstar watched as a human squad moved through dense jungle terrain during a training scenario. They communicated in efficient bursts. They adapted to obstacles with fluid grace. They moved like predators through an environment that should have slowed them down. The intelligence officer continued his briefing and explained that humans were persistence hunters. On Earth, they had not been the fastest predators or the strongest, but they had developed a different strategy. They chased their prey until the animal collapsed from exhaustion. Humans could run for hours in heat that would kill most pursuit predators. Their prey literally died from being chased too long. The general asked the obvious question. If humans could do this to prey animals, what could they do to enemy soldiers? The intelligence officer had no good answer. The Vryn military was built around short, intense engagements because most species could not sustain prolonged combat. Human endurance changed every calculation. A human force could potentially chase an enemy unit until they were too exhausted to fight back. The psychological impact alone would be devastating. Similar conversations were happening on dozens of worlds. The Chlorian Assembly convened emergency sessions to debate whether humanity should be quarantined in their own star system until the Council could determine if they posed a threat to galactic peace. The Telex Corporation, which had been planning mining operations and systems near Earth's solar space, abruptly canceled all contracts and withdrew their survey teams. Insurance companies tripled their rates for any shipping routes that passed through human-controlled space. The fear was not based on any hostile action. Humanity had taken but simply on what they might be capable of if they chose to use their Death World advantages. On the planet Sorrow, which served as the primary training facility for the galactic defense force, the implications became even clearer. Commander Vexenal had spent decades training soldiers from dozens of species to survive in extreme environments. Sorrow was classified as a Category 6 world with thin atmosphere and harsh terrain and extreme temperature swings. It was considered one of the most challenging training grounds in the galaxy. When word came that a human delegation would be visiting, Vexenal prepared an appropriate welcome that included full environmental protection and a tour of the less dangerous zones. Jake Mitchell stepped off the shuttle without wearing a helmet. Vexenal stared at the human and felt his carefully prepared plans dissolve. He pointed out that while the atmosphere was technically breathable, the oxygen content was only 18% in most species, required supplementation below 19%. Jake looked around at the rocky, wind-scoured landscape and explained that humans could adapt to thin air. Some Earth cities were built at high altitudes where oxygen was naturally low. People just breathed more heavily for a few days until their bodies adjusted by producing more red blood cells. Lisa Warren, who had also arrived without environmental protection, was examining the terrain with interest. She commented that the landscape reminded her of desert regions on Earth, places like Nevada or Arizona. When Vexenal asked if Earth had regions that looked like this, Lisa confirmed that millions of humans lived in similar environments. They had built cities in deserts where daytime temperatures could kill exposed individuals in hours. Las Vegas alone had over 500,000 permanent residents. Vexenal led the humans through the training facility, and with each passing hour he became more unsettled by what he observed. The humans did not react to temperature fluctuations that sent his own soldiers scrambling for climate control suits. They navigated rough terrain without complaint or apparent difficulty. When they passed a group of trainees struggling through an endurance course, Lisa mentioned that similar obstacle courses existed on Earth as civilian entertainment. Humans paid money to participate in races that involved crawling through mud and climbing over walls. In running for kilometers, the breaking point came when they entered the survival training zone, where a massive predator native to Sorrow was kept in a reinforced enclosure. The creature was one of the apex hunters on the planet and was used to teach soldiers proper threat avoidance and escape techniques. Jake approached the barrier with curiosity instead of the fear that Vexenal expected. The humans studied the creature's muscular build and sharp claws and asked how fast it could move. Vexenal explained that it was fast enough to catch most prey species. Jake asked if the predator hunted in packs or alone. When Vexenal said it was typically a solo hunter, Jake nodded and explained that on Earth, humans needed to know this kind of information to survive encounters. Different predators required different strategies. For some, you made yourself look large and backed away slowly. For others, you curled up to protect vital organs and played dead. The specific response depended on the species, and humans learned these distinctions as children. Vexenal felt something cold settle in his chest. He asked how often humans encountered predators in their daily lives. Jake considered the question and said it depended on where you lived. In bear territory, maybe a few times a year for people who hiked regularly. Mountain lion areas had similar risks. In Australia, everything was potentially dangerous, so people just learned to check their surroundings constantly before doing anything. Children were taught to shake out their shoes before putting them on because venomous spiders like to hide in dark spaces. That evening, Vexenal sat in his office and composed a classified report to Galactic Defense Command. He wrote that if humans could be trained to operate on Category 8 death worlds, they would be essentially unstoppable in any combat environment known to the Council. Their natural endurance combined with their ability to adapt to hostile conditions made them ideal for operations that would incapacitate other species. His recommendation was immediate diplomatic engagement to ensure that humanity remained an ally rather than becoming an adversary. Other reports was similar. Conclusions were being filed across the galaxy. Economic analysts predicted that human labor would revolutionize mining and resource extraction in hazardous environments. Medical researchers wanted to study human healing capabilities and pain tolerance. Military planners both feared and desired human soldiers as allies. Diplomatic corps struggled to develop appropriate protocols for dealing with a species that could survive conditions most others could not. The panic was not about anything humanity had done, but about what they represented. They were proof that the galaxy's understanding of habitable worlds was incomplete. They were evidence that intelligence could evolve under conditions previously thought impossible. They were a reminder that the universe was more dangerous and more diverse than anyone had imagined. And most troubling of all, they were now loose in galactic space with all the advantages their terrible homeworld had given them. Jake and Lisa returned to their quarters after the tour of sorrow and compared notes on the reactions they had observed. Every species they encountered seemed frightened, or at least deeply concerned about what humanity might do. Nobody seemed to consider that humans might be peaceful or cooperative or interested in mutual benefit. They saw only the potential threat. Lisa asked Jake if he thought the Council would vote to accept humanity, or if they would find some excuse to deny membership. Jake admitted he did not know, but he suspected the next few weeks would determine humanity's place in the galaxy for generations to come. 3 months after the reclassification of Earth, the Galactic Council reconvened for humanity's official membership hearing, and the chamber was more crowded than anyone could remember. Every delegation had sent their full complement of representatives, and many had brought additional advisors and observers. The atmosphere was tense with anticipation and underlying fear as Jake Mitchell and Lisa Warren took their positions at the center of the floating platform. This time, they were accompanied by a larger human delegation that included Colonel Ryan Bennett, who had commanded military operations in some of Earth's harshest environments, and Dr. Helen Cruz, who specialized in studying how life adapted to extreme conditions. The head counselor pulsed with solemn authority and formally opened the session. The counselor acknowledged that humanity had requested membership and that recent discoveries about Earth required the Council to consider not only whether humans met the qualifications, but also what it would mean to integrate a Category 8 Death World species into the galactic community. Jake nodded and stated clearly that humanity understood the concerns, and was prepared to address them with complete honesty. Ambassador? Dexner was the first to speak, and his tone had changed dramatically from their first meeting. There was no mockery now, only genuine curiosity mixed with caution. He asked Jake to help the Council understand how humanity had managed to develop advanced civilization on a world that should have made such progress impossible. The resources required just to survive should have prevented technological advancement. Yet humans had not only survived, but had reached the stars. How was this possible? Dr. Cruz stepped forward and explained that the answer lay in the nature of challenge itself. Earth had not prevented human advancement, but had driven it forward. Every obstacle their planet presented had forced innovation. Predators taught humans to create better weapons and defenses. Weather extremes taught them to build stronger shelters. Diseases taught them medicine and sanitation. Resource scarcity taught them agriculture and food preservation. Humans did not advance despite Earth's hostility, but because of it. The constant pressure to solve problems or die had shaped human culture around innovation and adaptation. A delegate from the peaceful world of harmony raised a concern that many others shared. Human history was filled with violence and warfare and conflict. Was this not the inevitable result of evolving on such a brutal world? Could the Council really trust a species whose past was soaked in blood? Colonel Bennett answered this question, and his voice was steady and honest. He acknowledged that humanity had fought too many wars and caused too much suffering. But Earth had also taught humans that cooperation was more effective than competition for long-term survival. When disasters struck, humans helped each other regardless of which nation or group they belonged to. Hurricanes brought neighbors together. Earthquakes prompted international aid. The same harsh environment that made humans tough had also taught them the value of community. Another delegate pointed out that humanity now wanted to bring this duality into the galactic community. Their capacity for violence existed alongside their capacity for cooperation. How could the Council be sure which tendency would dominate? Lisa met the delegate's gaze and responded that every species in the chamber had both capacities. The difference was that humans were honest about their nature. They knew what they were capable of, both good and bad. They did not pretend to be something they were not. This honesty was itself a form of safety, because it meant humans could be trusted to acknowledge problems rather than hiding them. The head counselor asked about the concerns that some civilizations had raised regarding quarantine. There were those who believed Category 8 Deathworlders were too dangerous to integrate into civilized society. How did humanity respond to this position? Jake's answer was calm but firm. He pointed out that humanity was already part of the galactic community, whether the Council liked it or not. Humans had been broadcasting signals into space for over a century. They had sent probes beyond their solar system. They had achieved faster than light travel. The Council could not quarantine them any more than it could stop a star from burning. The only choice was whether humanity developed as an ally or as a stranger. Captain Zormak spoke publicly for the first time since presenting his report and asked what humanity could offer the Council beyond their obvious capabilities as survivors and soldiers. Dr. Cruz smiled and explained that Earth's hostility had made humans exceptionally adaptable. They could live and work in environments that other species found uninhabitable. They could solve problems under conditions that would overwhelm others. They had learned to see challenges as opportunities rather than obstacles. The galaxy contained thousands of worlds classified as too dangerous for colonization or resource extraction. Humans could help with that work, not to replace other species, but to complement them, to go where others could not, and bring back what was needed. A new voice entered the conversation. Representative Quen from the Scientific Enclave of New Thought explained that she had reviewed human databases and been impressed by what she'd found. Human medical technology developed to combat Earth's diseases was remarkably advanced. Human engineering tested by earthquakes and storms was more robust than galactic standards. Human psychology born from managing constant fear and trauma could help countless beings across the galaxy. Humanity had much to offer beyond their survival skills. The debate continued for hours, with delegates raising questions and the human delegation answering each one with patience and transparency. They did not minimize Earth's dangers or humanity's flaws. Instead, they owned both and presented themselves as a species shaped by hardship into something uniquely capable. They acknowledged mistakes they had made in their own history and explained what they had learned from those failures. They spoke about their hopes for the future and their desire to contribute positively to galactic civilization. Finally, the head counselor called for silence and posed one final question. If the council accepted humanity, what guarantee could they offer that humans would not become a threat to peaceful worlds? Jake was quiet for a long moment, choosing his words with great care. He said that he could not guarantee humans would never make mistakes because perfection was impossible. What he could guarantee was that humans understood the value of life because they fought for it every day on their world. They understood the importance of cooperation because they had seen what happened without it. They understood that strength meant nothing without wisdom to guide it. Jake continued by explaining that Earth had made them survivors, but humans had chosen to become more than that. They had chosen to be explorers and scientists and artists and builders. They had chosen hope over despair and progress over stagnation. They had chosen to reach for the stars, not to conquer, but to learn and grow. That choice defined humanity more than their origins ever could. What they offered was not a guarantee of perfection, but a promise of sincere effort. To be worthy of their place among the stars and to prove through actions that Deathworlders could be partners rather than threats. The vote was called in the chamber, filled with light as delegates registered their decisions through various means. Some used vocal confirmation, while others employed gestural systems or technological interfaces. The counting took several minutes, and Jake felt his heart pounding as he watched the numbers accumulate. When the final tally was complete, the head counselor announced the results. 743 votes in favor, 212 against, 45 abstentions. By the power vested in the Council, humanity of Earth was granted provisional membership. The chamber erupted in a mixture of cheers and concerned murmurs. Some delegates celebrated the decision, while others looked worried about what they had just approved. Jake and Lisa exchanged glances that carried relief and determination in equal measure. They had done it. Against all odds and despite every reason for the galaxy to fear them, humanity had earned its place among the stars. But both of them knew that this was only the beginning. Provisional membership meant they would be watched closely and judged by their actions. Trust would have to be earned one day at a time, as the human delegation left the council chamber. They were surrounded by beings from dozens of species. Some offered congratulations, while others voiced concerns or asked questions about human capabilities and intentions. Jake answered each inquiry with patience and honesty. He knew that humanity's reputation would be built through countless small interactions like these. Every word mattered. Every action would be scrutinized. The galaxy had accepted them, but acceptance was not the same as trust. Colonel Bennett walked beside Jake and spoke quietly. He said that billions of humans back on Earth were watching and waiting for news of the vote. When they learned that humanity had been accepted into the Galactic Council, there would be celebrations across the planet. But there would also be tremendous responsibility. Humans would now represent their entire species in everything they did. Every human who traveled to other worlds would carry the weight of Earth's reputation with them. Lisa added that this was exactly what they had prepared for. Earth had taught humanity to handle pressure and adapt to challenges. The galaxy would test them in new ways, but the fundamental skills remained the same. Listen carefully. Learn quickly. Work together. Stay humble. These principles had carried humans through 4 billion years of survival on a hostile planet. They would serve just as well in navigating the complexities of galactic politics and society. The human delegation returned to their quarters, and Jake stood at the window looking out at the stars that filled the view. Somewhere among those points of light was Earth spinning through space with its oceans and continents and billions of humans who had never left their dangerous, beautiful home. The Deathworld had sent its children to the stars, and those children had proven themselves worthy of standing alongside species from gentler worlds. Now came the harder part, living up to the promise they had made and showing the galaxy that humanity deserved not just acceptance, but respect and friendship.